Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angélica Ospina, and I'm a senior researcher at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. IISD hosts the National Adaptation Plan Global Network, and on behalf of the network, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you that have joined us today from different continents in order to exchange ideas and experiences on the topic of monitoring and evaluation of adaptation in the context of the NAP process. We have a very exciting agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll look at some of the key opportunities and challenges posed by M&E of adaptation. Then we have the pleasure of having with us Timo Laita, Advisor of Climate Change Adaptation and Climate Finance at GIZ, who's going to provide us with an overview of the guidebook Developing National Adaptation M&E Systems that has become an important source of guidance and advice for countries in order for them to navigate through the NAP process. We'll finish off with a very interesting presentation provided by Dr. Sepang Makolela, who is the Director of Climate Change Adaptation, Monitoring and Evaluation at the Department of Environmental Affairs of South Africa. Dr. Makolela will share with us the country experiences with M&E of adaptation, and we are going to finish the webinar with a session of questions and answers and some final reflections. Let's start then looking at some of the key challenges and opportunities that are posed by M&E of adaptation. So what are the linkages between M&E and the broader adaptation process? National M&E of adaptation looks at understanding if and how adaptation interventions are reducing vulnerability, improving adaptive capacity, and supporting the overall well-being of populations affected by the impacts of climate change. And it may focus on process, which refers to the advancement in implementing policies, plans, or interventions towards adaptation, or on adaptation outcomes, which refer to the actual impacts that those policies, plans, or interventions may have. It often requires data and information from across sectors and about interventions taking place at subnational levels, and also takes into account other factors that intervene in adaptive change. So, as countries advance in the design and implementation of their NAPs, there is an increasing focus on M&E of adaptation progress and outcomes. We have learned that no one size fits all, and that M&E approaches need to be adapted and tailored to the specific needs and circumstances of each country. And because each country case is unique, some countries are a bit ahead than others in terms of the process of designing and implementing their M&E systems of adaptation. Through a series of NAP-GN events that took place in Malawi and in Colombia over the past few months, we've had the opportunity to explore the current perceptions of M&E opportunities and challenges by adaptation planners and implementers in different countries. We identified that as countries advance in the design and implementation of their M&E systems, the challenges and the opportunities related to M&E of adaptation are also evolving. And that is interesting because what we have identified is that the initial momentum of M&E of adaptation as part of the NAP process originated what we could call a first generation of perceived challenges and opportunities. But as countries advance in their understanding of this field and develop new technical capacities, there are also new questions that are emerging and new approaches that are worthwhile exploring. Let's discuss briefly some of the key opportunities and challenges that are part of this so-called first generation and that are foundational issues in a sense that most of you are familiar with or have read in available resources. So we won't spend too much time on them. But let's start first hearing what you think about the opportunities that are involved with processes of M&E of adaptation. So we are going to ask you to respond to a quick survey that you will be seeing very briefly in your screen. So the survey that we are asking you to answer is, what is the main benefit of M&E for adaptation for your country? And the choices are adaptive management, accountability and reporting, learning about evolving adaptation contexts and needs, and building support for adaptation from taxpayers and other constituents. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to select your choice. The poll is open, and we are seeing very rapidly that one of the main opportunities identified relate to the topic of learning about evolving adaptation contexts and needs. Thank you so much for that. We're going to explore a little bit more those opportunities that are better known and documented in this field, and that involve mainly the purposes and uses of M&E, largely around the topics that were included in the survey that you just completed. Issues such as adaptive management and course adjustments, accountability and reporting, including showcase of results on the international stage, for example, through national communications to the Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC, as well as learning about the evolving adaptation context, the needs and experiences, and building support for adaptation from taxpayers, constituents, and other development partners, including demonstrating progress and results. And of course, one of the key opportunities and purposes of M&E, informing strategic decisions. We are going to ask you to fill another quick survey about the challenges that you perceived in terms of monitoring and evaluation of adaptation. So the question is going to be showing in your screen very shortly, and it relates to the main challenge for designing and implementing M&E for adaptation in your country, and the options are technical resources, financial resources, political will and commitment, and stakeholder engagement. So the results that are coming in indicate that one of the main perceived challenges is the issue of gaining and engaging political will and commitment for the design and implementation of these systems. So some other challenges that again have been identified by adaptation planners in developing countries relate to issues that again are familiar to all of us: the lack of financial and technical resources for M&E, the need to ensure that political will and commitment, stakeholder engagement and integration across sectors and across scales, as well as challenges related to a lack of a common metric to measure success in terms of adaptation, ensuring that the adaptation indicators are smart, that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. Other issues include the long time scale over which climate change unfolds, as well as the uncertainty regarding the actual impacts of climate change. We also have identified issues of attribution that make it difficult to determine whether a change can be directly attributed to a particular intervention, as well as the unavailability of data. And of course, a challenge that is very well known to all of you is the fact of ensuring gender-sensitive M&E systems. So these are all challenges that by and large have been identified by developing countries working through their NAP processes. So how are these opportunities and challenges evolving? Along with the progress made in the NAP process around the globe, the M&E discussion among adaptation planners has gained both breadth and depth. As M&E systems of adaptations are designed and implemented, the challenges and opportunities associated with those systems are also evolving. The topic is transitioning from the purely conceptual to the practical level, and there is also a higher level of awareness about the complex nature of adaptation measurement. So how are adaptation planners responding to that? Well, they are responding through emerging questions about why, what, when, and how to measure adaptive change, as well as through more practical, action-oriented approaches to M&E for adaptation. This transition to a new set of challenges and opportunities does not mean that the initial or the first generation issues have been solved or are exhausted. Many are still very much valid, but the approaches to address them naturally changes over time. So let's take a closer look at some of the emerging opportunities and challenges that have been identified by developing country adaptation planners as part of this second generation. So in terms of emerging opportunities, we have found that there's a deeper emphasis and more importance placed on building upon what already exists in order to avoid duplication of efforts and benefit from the lessons learned and from the data available, as well as the systems and tools that the countries have already developed. There's also a growing interest on the use of M&E to extract lessons and evidence of the co-benefits between mitigation and adaptation. Also on the role of M&E for gathering evidence on the costs saved by adaptation measures in order to argue or make the business case of adaptation. There's also a growing sense of the need for a collective construction of indicators as a process to integrate diverse stakeholders, and this is very much linked to the fact that M&E of adaptation is not the responsibility of a single sector, but these processes need to foster a broader sense of ownership, which, by the way, is key for learning. Linked to the above, we have identified that the design and implementation of M&E for adaptation is increasingly seen as a platform for coordination and new dialogue among sectors and levels. So it's playing an integrative function in a way. M&E as well is seen increasingly as being key to provide evidence in order to scale up and replicate successful approaches, to identify gaps, to inform new investment decisions, and through effective communication to foster articulation of efforts among adaptation donors. This point is very interesting. And we also found as well that there's an increasing emphasis on effective communication of M&E results as part of a broader NAP communication strategy, and increasing linkages between M&E and the decentralization of information and processes in order to involve municipal, territorial, and community level efforts, as well as non-traditional sectors, for example, defense, in national adaptation. In terms of challenges as part of this second generation, we have identified among the concerns of adaptation planners the overload and misalignment of M&E and other reporting requirements for different agendas and purposes, as well as ensuring buy-in and coordination in order to gather data across sectors and levels, inadequate technical capacity not only to design and establish the M&E system, but actually to support it over time and adjust the system as required. Of course, is the issue of, there's also the issue of staff turnover among those responsible for designing and sustaining the M&E system, and the concern over continuity of staff. Measure and reporting negative change and learning from maladaptation is also an issue that is of increasing importance, as well as identifying indicators that are transversal to all sectors vis-a-vis isolated measures of particular sectors and projects. And this is an issue that is closely linked to the importance of fostering cross-sectoral learning about adaptation. Another issue that has been identified as part of the challenges is the need to better integrate qualitative measurements in order to understand pathways of change, and undertaking M&E as an ongoing process that is financially sustainable over time, as opposed to an activity that is dependent on time-bound projects. Last but not least is the challenge that we call the next level of political high-level buy-in, which is the need of ensuring commitment not only to design M&E systems, but actually to undertake appropriate actions and follow up once a need for changing directions and adjustments are identified. So along with this second generation of challenges and opportunities, we're also seeing emerging innovative solutions to address those challenges and take advantages of the opportunities of M&E of adaptation. We identified emerging solutions related mainly to issues of stakeholder engagement and alignment, resource strengthening, as well as data quality, communication, and effective use of evidence. Unfortunately, we won't have much time to explore this in detail, but for example, in terms of stakeholder engagement and alignment, we see that countries are prioritizing the early involvement of a wide range of stakeholders in the stage of design of the M&E systems to foster ownership and collaboration, and many countries have opted to form working groups on M&E of adaptation as one option for ensuring sustained involvement of different sectors and levels in the process. In terms of resource strengthening, we also have seen that countries are starting to prioritize the indicators. They are choosing to start small and then expand and complement the system over time. And in terms of data quality and effective use, countries are increasingly interested on how to use in information and communication technologies, including mobile applications for data collection and novel visualization techniques in order to report and to disseminate evidence collected through their M&E systems. So this is an ongoing conversation. We want to learn from you about the opportunities, challenges, and potential solutions that you have identified in your countries in terms of M&E. So please feel free to reach out to us on this subject. My email is there. We would love to hear from you and engage in this conversation further. Please stay tuned to upcoming publications and blog posts about M&E on the network, and we're excited to continue this dialogue with you. So now I would like to introduce you to Timo Laita from GIZ, who is going to provide us with an overview of a very important resource to help guide countries through the NAP process. Timo,
thank you very much, Angélica, and a warm welcome to all of you. It's great to see so many joining us on today's webinar. I'm going to present to you a new guidebook which GIZ developed on how countries can develop adaptation M&E systems as part of the NAP process. So very briefly on the background, I'm working for a global project called Effective Adaptation Finance, M&E Adapt. And since 2012, on behalf of the German Ministry BMZ, we have been supporting several countries in the development of national adaptation M&E systems. One of these countries is South Africa, which is going to present after me. And we also supported additional countries. We also developed a toolbox for adaptation M&E, which includes the guidebook which I'm going to present. And you can check all these resources out at our website, adaptationcommunity.net. So, after a very short introduction, we're going to have a look at the 4 building blocks of the guidebook. Please allow me a short introduction. So, many countries are currently developing national adaptation M&E systems. Some of them are doing it as part of the NAP process. For example, Togo and others like the Philippines have started with the development of such a system before. For many countries, the reason to do so is to better understand the national progress they are making towards adaptation. So, meaning, are there climate change strategies and NAP process? Are they progressing? And are they leading to more adaptation and to a better adapted national policies? So there are at least 20 countries which have started developing national adaptation M&E system and which have advanced, but only a few of them have started reporting on the results of these adaptation M&E systems. South Africa is the first developing country which last year released its first climate change progress report based on their climate change M&E system. But soon also Cambodia, the Philippines, and the Mekong River Commission are going to join. And many more countries are working on this topic. The link to the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement calls for enhanced transparency. So there's the question for countries and how they can track progress towards their NDC goals, and also what they may communicate as part of adaptation communications, and also the global stocktake, which is measuring the collective progress towards adaptation, also requires a level of information. So the Paris Agreement actually requests countries to provide information on adaptation actions and adaptation effectiveness. And this is what national adaptation M&E systems can help to provide. And for further details, you see here a picture of the policy brief on this matter, which we released during COP22. And again, you can find this policy brief on adaptationcommunity.net. Yeah, then M&E is an important part of the NAP process. M&E is element D of the NAP technical guidelines, which includes monitoring the NAP process and reviewing the NAP document itself. And the NAP technical guidelines from 2012 provide relatively little detail on how to do M&E. So this has been a major question from countries for support to ask how can they develop an adaptation M&E system. And this is why in 2015 the Least Developed Country Expert Group, the Adaptation Committee, IISD and GIZ partnered to develop a supplementary materials for the NAP technical guidelines to provide further details on adaptation M&E. You see the cover of the guidebook here on the slide. What's special about this guidebook is that it is not prescriptive. This means this guidebook does not tell countries the one single solution. Instead, it is providing guiding questions that are very important for countries to consider and which provide orientation for countries to develop country-specific and country-driven adaptation M&E systems. The guidebook builds on lessons learned from GIZ's and other organizations' experience in developing these systems. Yeah, so it's based on the experience that was available until recently. So let's have a look at the core of the guidebook. So the guidebook is structured around 4 building blocks, which you see here. At the heart of it is the orange triangle in the middle, what we call context. This is like the setting in the country. For example, what the purpose of M&E is, what the national policies are, if it's part of the NAP process or not. And then the context also informs the green triangle, the content of the M&E system, as well as the operationalization and the product. So in the following slides, we're going to go through each of these 4 building blocks, and I'm going to provide some examples also. Let us start with the first building block, which is the context. So the first question for any country starting to develop an adaptation M&E system at the national or regional level is what the relevant policies and processes are. For example, Mexico has got a climate change law, which makes it mandatory for the government authorities to develop a system to monitor its adaptation progress. And this has been the mandate for the Ministry of the Environment in Mexico to start developing the M&E system. Similarly, in the UK, there's a national adaptation program, and there's a national climate change law mandating that such an M&E system is being developed. So the context is important, how this links to different policies and programs. And then maybe most important is the purpose of the M&E system. So what is the M&E system trying to achieve? Is it going to look at implementation of a strategy or a plan, meaning implementation has taken place? Or is the purpose to manage an ongoing process like the NAP process? Or is the purpose to help learn from experience Or is the purpose mainly accountability related to demonstrate progress has been made and results have been achieved? And depending on what the purpose is, the M&E system has to be designed differently, because you need a different makeup for learning, for example, than for accountability. Another question is what the scale of the M&E system is, if it mainly applies at the national level or at the subnational level, and which sectors it is going to cover. So this is the first building block, the context. Now moving to the second building block, which is also a very crucial one, because this one describes how the M&E system is designed. First of all, the question is, what exactly do you want to monitor? Because saying to monitor adaptation is still a very broad statement. So do you want to monitor a particular plan or a process? Do you want to monitor, for example, the mainstreaming of adaptation? Or do you want to monitor results of adaptation? And here an important distinction is between adaptation process and adaptation outcomes. Process means you're focusing mainly on implementation. Have things been done as stated in policies? Did it take place? But not asking what the results or the impacts of these actions have been. On the other hand, monitoring adaptation outcomes looks at, are you actually adapting? So is the population better prepared, for example? Have damages been avoided? So the content question here is, does your M&E system mainly focus on the process aspects or also on the outcomes or on both? And so far, most countries focused on process, but it's of course also important to try to look at the outcomes. Let's look at a brief example here for Brazil. Brazil was one of the first countries to submit its NAP document to UNFCCC last year in May, and they included an initial M&E system. And what you see here are some of the indicators which they were using. And what you see here in red in italics is the part which tells you whether it's process-oriented or outcome-oriented. And so far here you can see from the indicators stating like developed and implemented, created and implemented, elaborated, all these indicators tell you whether something has been done, but they don't say what the impact or effect of this has been. And therefore Brazil is now developing, is further developing the M&E system to also include the outcome part. Yeah, so this is once again saying here on this slide that there's a difference in M&E of the NAP process itself, like looking at whether the NAP process is on track, or whether to look at outcomes. So a key information for countries starting their adaptation M&E system is to ask, what information do you really need? What information are you looking for in the M&E system? And who needs that information? Because we want adaptation M&E systems to be useful and the information to be used. And therefore the link to decision-making processes is also important. So the key question should be, what information do you need to address the purpose? Once you have answered this question, this also shows you that this explains why the M&E systems for adaptation, which we've seen so far, are very different across countries. And we have done the study that you see here in 2014, which compared different adaptation M&E systems. And it turns out that every country is using a somewhat different and tailor-made system because they have different information needs, different capacities, and different contexts. So M&E is more than just indicators. That's an important takeaway. Many times people jump straight to formulating indicators, but you should also ask yourselves, how do these indicators make sense, and who's going to use that information? For example, if you've got an indicator stating that agricultural yield has improved, then you still don't know, was this because of adaptation or was it because of other factors? So the interpretation of indicators is an important point also. So indicators do have limitations. Indicators do not state how or why change occurred. And therefore, whilst indicators are an important part of M&E, you shouldn't start with indicators, but you should start with formulating the purpose and the target audience and your information needs, and only then move to indicators. I think I'm a bit short in time, so I cannot go in detail into this example. Very briefly stating, this is an example of the M&E system of Morocco, and they have used a climate change impact chain to illustrate what the adaptation, the climate effects are, and what adaptation options are available. And then they looked where in this impact chain they could use indicators. So I'm showing this to say it's important that indicators are part of some framework, be it a theory of change or climate change impact chain or results chain, to provide meaning to the different indicators. So the example of Morocco is just one way to do it, and you find further information on this on our website adaptationcommunity.net in this publication. So two more building blocks to go. The first and the second building block were most important. The third building block is about how to operationalize the system. Key points here are, is the data available? Many countries so far have looked at what data is available and then only chosen the indicators for which data is available. So data management, data access is a very important point here. And another one is what resources are available, who is responsible for the M&E system, and how can it be sustained over time. These are important questions of the third building block. And so we're coming to the final building block, which is to communicate the results. Because if you put all this effort into designing and developing the M&E system, you want the information to be useful to your target audience. So the key question here is, how can you make the information available? Maybe it's more than just doing an annual report. Several countries are also doing websites to reach the different target audiences in different points in time and maximize the usability of the information. Just one example before we conclude. The United Kingdom has every 2 years a report to Parliament on adaptation progress, and every 5 years they've got a national climate change risk assessment. So this is an example of the products that can come out of an adaptation M&E system. Finally, to wrap up the key messages, M&E is an important part of the NAP process. To make M&E useful, it's important to define the purpose of M&E, the scope of the system, the target users, but also, of course, to keep in mind the available capacities and resources. Indicators are important, but they are only one part of the M&E system. And if you do develop such a system, it can also help you to get information required for the Paris Agreement. To conclude, we've got these fact sheets that you find on our website, adaptationcommunity.net, where you find details on the adaptation M&E systems of 10 countries, and we're currently updating these resources. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and you will just see the example from South Africa further, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Timo, for a great overview of the guidebook and great detail on the various resources that are available to support adaptation planners in this field. Thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Sepang Makolela, Director of Climate Change Adaptation Monitoring and Evaluation at the Department of Environmental Affairs of South Africa. So with this, I will leave you with Sepang.
Thank you very much. I'm going to present about the lessons learned from the monitoring and evaluation in the NEP process, in particular for South Africa. And I'll start by indicating what are the strategic objectives for national climate for the National Adaptation Plan or strategy in South Africa is to build climate resilience and adaptive capacity to respond to climate change risks and vulnerability, provide strategic leadership and guidance on the integration of climate change adaptation responses into current and future development objectives of the country, optimize policy, planning, and implementation coherence to ensure balanced outcomes, and improve current planning for climate change adaptation. And we also have strategic priorities and sub-priorities in the NAS. And the first one is to reduce human vulnerability and build human adaptive capacity, reduce economic vulnerability and build economic adaptive capacity, ensure resilient physical capital, ensure resilient natural capital, ensure institutional support for climate adaptation, ensure public-private civil society collaboration and stewardship, enable substantial flow of climate finance, improve our understanding of climate change impacts and their development implications, and build capacity and awareness necessary for effective action. But then when it comes specifically to the monitoring and evaluation in South Africa, the work that we're doing, we have developed what we call the desired adaptation outcomes for monitoring and evaluating climate resilience. And these desired adaptation outcomes were informed by the National Climate Change Response White Paper, which was published in 2011, the National Development Plan, and also by national sectors and local relevant plans, and also the National Adaptation Strategy, which is still being developed, is not finalized as yet, and the adaptation goals in the South African NDC. And from all of these documents, then we came out with what you call a high-level 8 desired generic desired adaptation outcomes. And in terms of the monitoring and evaluation framework, this monitoring and evaluation framework is informed by the National Climate Change Response White Paper at national level, and it has got 3 building blocks. The first one is on climate information, and there we are looking at climate observation and enhancement of monitoring systems and networks, and projections, climate and atmospheric data analysis and dissemination. And the other building block is on climate risks, impact and vulnerability. There we are looking at observed and projected climate impacts and risks, monitoring changing vulnerability in general, and other stresses that might affect vulnerability, because the vulnerability is not only due to climate change. Climate change is just an additional stressor to already other existing vulnerabilities. So it's important for us to understand what are those other existing vulnerability. And then under climate response measures, there we are looking at climate change governance and management, which is basically the policies, plans, strategy, legislation, institutional arrangements, coordination mechanisms in terms of climate change adaptation. And most importantly, we need to understand the effectiveness of our responses in reducing vulnerability and enhancing resilience. So all this information fit into the desired adaptation outcomes, but we are also in the process of developing the web-based monitoring and evaluation platform, which will be linked to the South African Risk and Vulnerability Atlas, and this will be the basis for reporting nationally and internationally, and also for decision making. And then what are these generic desired adaptation outcomes? Like I said, is 8 of them. The first one is saying that robust or integrated plans and policies and actions for climate change adaptation together with resilience and capacity, which are effectively monitored over short, medium, and long term. And then we have appropriate processes and mechanisms for coordinating climate change adaptation. We also have reliable climate information, including seasonal predictions and future projection, and early warning for extreme weather events and other climate-related events to inform adaptation planning and disaster. We also have capacity development, education, and awareness programs, both formal and informal, for climate change adaptation, informed by adaptation research and with tools to utilize data and outputs. And the other one is on new and adapted technologies and knowledge and other cost-effective measures used in climate change adaptation. The sixth one is the systems, infrastructures, and communities and sectors are less vulnerable to climate change impacts and through effectiveness of adaptation interventions and response measures. The other one is non-climate pressures and threats to human and natural systems reduced. Like I said, we felt that it's important to look at other non-climate pressures. And the last one is on secure food, water, and energy supplies for all citizens. So this process started even before the NEP process started, and it was really what was informed by the National Climate Change Response White Paper. But then, given that what we have done as the National Adaptation Plan or strategy was being developed, we then identify the synergies or linkages or relationship with the next strategic priorities to identify where the information that we'll collect as we do the monitoring and evaluation for the desired adaptation outcomes can fit into the next sub-priorities and strategic priorities. And this table is just an indication of that. I will not go through it, but what came out was that there's a strong linkages and synergies with those sub-priorities and those are sub-priorities and priorities. And then And then what you also did was to based on those, they also look at what are the associated data and information needs, which other people prefer to call indicators, which will be checking the NAS. And I must emphasize that this is still work in progress because the NAS has not been finalized. And what I'm presenting today is still go through public comments. And once we get those public comments, the version that I'm presenting today might be completely different at the end, or it might be more or less the same. But it's just to emphasize that what I'm presenting today is still work in progress. So here we have each of the next strategic priorities and what are the proposed data or information needs, or what you like to call indicators that will monitor progress. So for instance, under robust or integrated plans, policies, and actions for climate change adaptation together with resources and capacity for effective delivery, we have data on number of sectors and plans and provincial and municipal development plans incorporating climate change adaptation, level of integration of adaptation into policies, programs, legislation, and related regulations, availability of resources and capacity to deliver actions, and effectiveness of adaptation plans, policies, and actions in the short, medium, and long term. So basically what we tried to do under each of these DOOs was to say, when we do which is not part of this presentation, we also try to design how we'll evaluate progress. And under that, we have the rate, which will say, for instance, in this particular case, it will say that no policies and plans, and then we'll have the M, and we'll also have the green, whereby the green will be where the policies and plans and programs are being implemented, and there's evidence that the resilience, the vulnerability has been reduced, or the adaptive capacity has been enhanced in one way or another. So I'll not go through all of them, but just to basically understand how it works, and then I'll look at the last one as well, just to give you a bit an idea. Is secure food, water, and energy supplies for all citizens, and the proposed data and information needs include food, water, and energy security plans incorporating climate change adaptation in sectors, provinces, and municipalities. So the provinces and municipalities that we are referring to here is what in other countries is called local government. And the uptake and effectiveness of new technical and indigenous knowledge in supporting development and implementation of climate resilient production and distribution of supply and systems. And then in terms of the next steps in the National Adaptation Plan is that we'll be gazetting the National Adaptation Plan, which of course include the monitoring and evaluation chapter for public comments. And then there will be stakeholder engagements on revised adaptation plan with inputs and comments addressed from the gazetting process. And then there will be a national consultative workshop, and we'll submit the National Adaptation Strategy for ministerial approval. In terms of the lessons learned, it is critical or important to define or develop approach or methodology for monitoring and evaluating climate resilience at national level, informed by the relevant legislation and policies and plans, and also to communicate progress in annual reports or under the reporting requirements through the UNFCCC. And what is also important, which has already been highlighted, is the need for stakeholder buy-in and ownership. And in terms of where we are at the moment in South Africa, so we are doing stakeholder consultations with key stakeholders for each of the desired adaptation outcomes, where we then go to the different stakeholders to say, under these desired adaptation outcomes, what is the data and information needs that are required to understand this desired adaptation outcome. And then need for ongoing assessment for synergies, linkages of the monitoring and evaluation framework or approaches as new plans or strategies are being developed. Like for instance, in our case, the monitoring and evaluation framework was developed before the National Adaptation Plan. So when the National Adaptation Plan was being developed, we then look at whether there are synergies and linkages, and whether the information that we'll collect through the desired adaptation outcome will then fit into the National Adaptation Plan. But also, this is not only on the National Adaptation Strategy. We also did the same for the NDC adaptation goals for South Africa. We also did the same for the SDGs, and we also did the same for the UNCCD strategic objectives, expected impacts and indicators. And what we realized was that there's clearly defined synergies between the DOS and all the National Adaptation Strategy, the NDC adaptation goals, the SDGs, and the UNCCD strategic objectives. So basically what it means is that the information that we collect through the desired adaptation outcomes can fit into the different processes. And the way that we have designed it is that it's not fixed. So if when we do the assessment for synergies and alignment, we identify that there's something that there's more that will have to be collected, we adjust it accordingly to accommodate whatever that is not currently being collected. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and to acknowledge the Chief Director for this adaptation, and who's leading the work on developing the National Adaptation Strategy, and Mike Halley, who has been working very closely with us on this work, and Timo, as is indicated, through the support that they've provided to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sepang, for a wonderful presentation and a very interesting and insightful view of South Africa's experience. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions from our participants. We're going to start with a short one for our panelists, and is regarding the availability of any free software for monitoring and evaluation. So our participants is asking if you have any knowledge of available free software that can help countries implement monitoring and evaluation. I don't know if Timo or Sepang would like to answer this. I know of one. There's a log frame-based M&E information system for international development that is called Kashana, and it is based on open data, and it's a system that is available online and free of cost, and it is aimed precisely at international development practitioners, NGOs, and funder agencies and evaluators that are working on international development issues, including adaptation. I have not seen it implemented, so I don't know how well it works, but I know it's available.
Okay.
I don't know if Timo
Yes,
can have other.
yes, thank you. I was muted earlier. The question is what you want the software to do. There's no software which automatically develops your M&E system for you. But once you have developed your M&E system, you can of course use software to support the data gathering. There is software available for adaptation M&E, as Angélica pointed out, for project level. We also have a tool, an Excel tool for M&E for adaptation projects, which you can find on our website, adaptationcommunity.net. So for the project level, there is software available. For the national level, if it's like a database, like in South Africa, for example, also having a database of adaptation projects. So you can use software, but that software would most likely need to be programmed for the specific case.
Thank you so much, Timo, for that. The next question, very briefly, is whether you would like to highlight any differences between M&E and MRE. So, in addition to perhaps the focus on the reporting aspects of the systems, do you think that there's any other significant difference between the two?
Between MRE or MRV?
I think our participants may have meant the second one. So if you would like to expand on that, Timo.
So there's a difference between MRV. The term MRV is typically used for mitigation, because for mitigation it's important to verify that the different countries, if you add up all the emission reductions, that this actually helps us to stay below 2 degrees. For adaptation, we don't speak of MRV, but of M&E. Because for adaptation there is no global success metric like reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but rather adaptation needs to be, success of adaptation needs to be defined in a context-specific way, and therefore we distinguish between the MRV of mitigation and M&E of adaptation. In fact, there will soon be a publication by the United Nations Environmental Programme, a book on adaptation metrics, where there's a chapter which exactly explains this difference between mitigation MRV and adaptation M&E.
Thank you so much for Timo. There's a few very interesting questions. I'm going to go towards one of the latest ones for Sepang. Sepang, this is directed to you. And our participant would like to know, Deepak would like to know, what were the challenges, including engaging stakeholders, you have encountered while designing M&E system in South Africa? So what have been the main challenges that you have encountered? Perhaps if you can highlight, Sepang, the three top challenges that you have encountered in South Africa.
Okay, the main challenges include alignment between all of us. Because, for instance, I'm coming from Department of Environmental Affairs, and the others will be other sectors, and they'll have their own policies and plans and legislation. So it was important to engage them and make sure that there's alignment between the work that we are doing and their work, so that the work together, this is not seen as the work of the Department of Environmental Affairs, but rather the department of the work of the nation. So that was the key one, that there was a need for alignment. And then the other one was the lack of champions for adaptation in general, because there are no dedicated home bodies to do the adaptation work. So even if some people, some sectors or provinces or municipalities might be keen to participate in this work, but this becomes an additional work to the work that they're already doing, and hence they might we like them to give. And then the other one was also the capacity to understand monitoring and evaluation, because most people are not experts on monitoring and evaluation, so there's a need for capacity and training so that we all understand what we are trying to do and have a common understanding on where we want to go. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sepang, for that. That's very interesting. I'm going to just limit the session to one question, unfortunately. For those participants that have shared other questions with us, we'll be very glad to follow up with you after the seminar. But I would like to end with a final question for Timo and Sepang, and it's from Kimboa Richard. And he's asking, how do you secure political buy-in for decentralized governments with competing priorities? So what could be the key lesson, one point, kind of key takeaway lesson in your experience that countries can take into account in order to secure political buy-in for monitoring and evaluation of adaptation? Sepang, Timo, which
Sepang, do you want to start?
The key thing is to align with the language that is understood at political level, and that differs. It is different for different situations. So you need to understand what is it that the politicians will be able to understand, and once you have identified what it is, then you try to align the work on M&E with what you have identified as a priority when it comes to politicians. But also where there are working groups which are led by ministers, and they meet and make decisions. But also for case of South Africa, the annual report that we published on annual basis is submitted to Parliament. So there's an opportunity then in Parliament to meet the politicians there and make sure that there's some level of ownership and buy-in into this work.
Yes, I can fully support what Sepang is saying. It's important to sell the M&E system to the decision makers so they understand the benefits. So it's about speaking their language. Also, it helps if there's a national mandate to develop an M&E system, like in many countries where there's a national climate change law, like in Mexico or in the UK or in the Philippines. There's this clear legal mandate to develop the M&E system, so the ministries have to do it. Finally, it possibly could help to outline the international the needs of countries under the Paris Agreement and the NDC. So countries need to report on progress, and the National Adaptation M&E system can be an important ingredient to develop this, and hopefully this could be an argument to secure buy-in.
Thank you so much, Timo and Sepang, for your insights. And again, to all of our participants, you will have the links to the resources that have been mentioned in your handout that you will receive after the webinar. But a reminder that you can read more about M&E in the NAP process in our website. The guidebook that Timo presented is also available in our website in Spanish, English, and French. And as we mentioned when we started, this is the third of a webinar series, and we'll be planning a subsequent set of webinars on the topic of financing for the NAP process. And so please stay tuned for that in August. How to stay in the loop in the meantime, a first step for getting involved in the network is registering online as a participant. It's free, open to all, and can be done on an individual basis. Participants working for developing country governments can access short-term targeted technical support in our country support hub, and get involved in peer learning and exchange. And bilateral donor participants can collaborate with us to share information on your NAP relevant support and coordinate with other donors and participate in network meetings and activities. So with this, I would like to thank you all very much again for your time, for your participation, for your questions, and we hope to see you again very soon in our next webinar. So have a very good rest of the day. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.